Hello, I'm Loren Sederstrom, and I'm the host of the All Around Grant Show. Hello, I'm Loren Sederstrom, and this is the latest edition of the All Around Grant Show. Today I have with me my co-host, Diana Longrie, and we're going to be tracking a process of following a CUP through both the Planning Commission and the City Council. But this is rather contentious because they're building a hockey arena on school property that they're leasing for $1 a year, and this is going to be a $12 to $14 million project. And of course, they're significantly along raising funds for this. I think they already have 37,000. A little further ways to go to 12 to 14 million. But anyway, the first we're going to do is we're going to see this rink 2. They're planning on putting this ice arena, and this is at the Planning Commission. Now, they do not want any dissenting opinions. So if we could play the first clip, please, and we'll talk on the other side.
And it's a huge project for us as well. And I think myself, and I'm sure others, really want to understand what this project entails, even the whole construction process and how that all goes about. But my first question, it's kind of a hypothetical question. Let's say this dump wasn't here, and you could build that arena on this land without that dump site. What is the cost difference between a clean site versus a dump site?
Right, absolutely. And again, I'd lean on
just a very rough figure.
I don't think
this is just the CUP, and I know you're asking a lot of good questions, but I don't think it's not a question that we should be asking right now of what if it wasn't a dump site? What if, it doesn't matter. It is. They're working through the state. They're going to, take away the dirt, put in clean fill, and it's all part of it. Okay. So that's what we have,
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about the excavation of the trash and how that is gone about, or is that not apply either?
MPCA already did that.
Yeah, the MPCA, they have to work through that. So from what I read in the whole stack, which I did read, from what I understand, they're going to take all that dirt away, move it to Ohio.
Yep. And so next year, and he can fill us in on some
That's
more
right.
details.
I'd like to,
Okay.
Mr. Fradlow, and I'd like to have.
There we go. Well, it's really interesting that is John Raj, by the way, the guy that was elected to the City Council and didn't bother to show up for the first meeting to get sworn in along with Kiefer, the other guy that was.
The guy who's asking the questions?
No, John Raj, the chairman there.
Oh, I see.
Jeff Schaefer, that was the December 18th Planning Commission meeting when they're talking about this rink. And it's very interesting that they're not even allow their commissioners to ask the questions. Well, you didn't ask the right question. So we're going to continue on with this. We've got 3 more clips relating to this, and then we'll go to the City Council. So if we could play the next clip, please, we'll talk on the other side.
Acquired it from Bel Air Sanitation, could not get a permit to do what they wanted to do, decided to sell it. And it's fairly typical when you have a party like that, that they want to put some conditions on the sale of the property because they don't want to be dragged back in to it. And so the first document that you referenced was really a real estate agreement between Waste Management. In the early 2000s, the legislature passed the Uniform Environmental Covenant Act. Up to that particular point, people used various restrictive covenants, but by the time the school district did their cleanup and had the approval process, they then were required through that act, as other people are now, to file that restrictive covenant. And as was stated, it does not allow to do anything else unless you have approval, again, from the pollution.
There. Well, they had a restricted covenant that nothing can be built on this municipal waste site.
And to be clear, tell our viewers a little bit about where the restrictive covenant is. I mean, where do you find it?
It is on the property title and deed registered with Washington County. So you go down there, and I have a copy of it. I've showed it to you folks before. It says nothing shall be constructed on the municipal waste site. Also, the top and the bottom shall not be penetrated, which they did right away off the top. So they're violating this. Later on, there's some things coming out. The CUP for the school, they're supposed to have biannual reports on water quality, which they haven't done. All these conditions on the conditional use permit have not been enforced. Now they're coming back and modifying it again. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
And it really is the role of the municipality to be the enforcer of the conditions of a conditional use permit. That's part of their role, that they granted that conditional use permit and they allowed a conditional use given certain terms of how that use would be conducted. And so the city, on behalf of the residents, that is their role. And as you're saying, they're actually shirking that enforcement role. So instead of doing enforcement of the current CUP, they're just simply amending it so they don't have to do enforcement.
Well, they're changing it. So as the law was passed in 2007 about the restrictive covenant change, I don't believe that grandfathers into a 2004. I would assume it's everything after that. And then they say, we have another clip where the MPCA will give you your permits when you're done. Well, you build a house, do you wait till you're done to get the permit? I don't think so. There has to be inspections. There's lots of things that went wrong. The mayor has a laissez-faire approach. Oh, do what you want, you know, unless there's somebody you don't like, and then they're going to nail you, and we'll talk about that. But let's go to the next clip, because this is a Mahtomedi resident that's been drastically affected by the pollution.
In Mahtomedi. Why this location? There are plenty of public documents from decades ago about this site. Its contamination and the suspected contamination some 200 feet south of County Road 12, impacting private residents. I personally know one homeowner whose well water turned yellow. From the past, in 2011, School District 832 surcharged that property, or a portion of that. In 2012, he entered into a joint powers agreement with the city of Mahtomedi for utilities, for sewer and water to construct the Wildwood Elementary School. You routed utilities through contaminated soils. Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry did not endorse the project. As a result, 1 year later, in 2013, the lake that I live on, Lost Lake, was impaired for high levels of mercury. The mayor, your current mayor, when it was brought to his attention, accused me of breaking light bulbs out there. He didn't take it seriously. Since then, he claims it's atmospheric. As a result of those sewer lines being run to the new school, I, as a property owner, was left with 440,000 gallons of raw sewer on my property in 2014. In 2015, another 160,000, because the school is one of the largest consumers of water in Mahtomedi.
There we go. First of all, I want to back up and explain surcharge. That's when they pile 10 to 15 feet high mound of dirt on top of the waste area, and what that does is put pressure to put it down further. Okay, the breaking light bulbs is he accused him of breaking fluorescent light bulbs that have mercury in them. I mean, this mayor is just unbelievable, unconscious. Just like Trump, he twists the truth into a pretzel. Oh, this is an alternate truth. So that's really interesting.
And I think we've discussed this on these programs before, but as part of the consequence of building that school, they disturbed the soil underneath, and which is clay in that area. And everybody knows, if you've ever had to deal with clay soil, it's very dense, it's very compact. Water does not run through it very easily. It actually is a barrier to the water running through
They line
it.
dumps with that. You're absolutely right.
Yes.
They line dumps. And what they do is when they excavate and put the sewer and water in, they put heavy granular sand underneath the pipe, and that is a causeway for any runoff to go down to
Right.
other areas, and that's what happened with Lost Lake.
Yes, and so when they did that and they put in that different type of soil, not the clay soil, and they cushioned those pipes with that soil, well then now you've got a conduit for all that water runoff coming out of the former dump site, and a water conduit with the contaminants draining right straight into the lake. And that's what that gentleman's talking about.
Well, they're now having some sulfur, I believe it's dioxide, is starting to show up in that school, that Wildwood School. Already 53 parents have pulled their kids because of nosebleeds and headaches, and 2 teachers have come down with cancer. But the other interesting thing, we're also with the Planning Commission meeting now. They passed a rule that said if you're at a public hearing, you're not allowed to speak if you're on the council. So that's what's going to come up. Watch this next clip, and we'll talk on the other side.
Councilman, and you are not allowed to speak at public comments. So,
I've
step
got a
aside.
statute here.
Pardon?
I have a statute that says I am allowed to speak at public
A
comments. So
statute.
Minnesota State statute, you have a right to speak.
Okay,
And-
you are
and
not,
so-
because in the city,
No,
yes, he is.
I have a right to speak. Now,
Can you please step aside, sir?
Mr. Rogoshevsky, you as a planning
Larry,
commissioner,
can you
allow all
please
the
step
crazy-
aside? You are not allowed to
Not,
speak.
Larry. I'm not going to
Please.
step aside. Number one, our city, I'm going to
What,
take my 3
Larry?
minutes.
You do this every meeting. You know you're not allowed to speak at these
Mr.
public
Rogg,
comments.
are you going to follow direction?
We are
You do
following
not-
the rules, Larry.
Not follow the rules. Your campaign signs were all over.
Oh, stop
no,
it.
you were not.
Please
Sir,
excuse
you
yourself.
do not follow rules.
Does anybody else?
Now, this is a clown that they put on there.
I don't see that there's any way that a person who is a resident of that community, who's affected by the issue at the public hearing, who is even not a resident, because obviously Mr. Dueski, he's a resident of Matamidi, he got to speak, and this issue affected him. If Mr. Lanou is affected by this issue, it should not matter what his title is. He should be able to speak at that public hearing. You don't give up that right just because you became elected.
Yeah, they follow the Maplewood playbook. They want no public input, and they do not want any transparency. We're going to go to the next one, and this is another perspective on this hockey arena.
This property, in order for this project to move forward, needs to be rezoned to commercial. And that's entirely opposite to our comprehensive plan. And if it is zoned commercial, it will become taxable.
Thank you.
See, what they're doing is they started a nonprofit. They're going to lease the ground, the 4 acres for $1 a year and put this building up. Well, there's going to be some problems with that. It's actually a commercial building, and it's not a school building, but the people are going to use it. Their groups or whatever are going to run it. As you know, Vadnais Heights had one and it went belly up. Ramsey County had to buy it. They're very expensive things to run, and I'm not sure how the money's going to work, how they're going to pay for it, because the school has to pay by ice time in the hockey, you know, they have to pay. So it's going to be very interesting.
So you have a nonprofit then who's going to charge the school district?
Yes.
I see. Okay.
And of course, the school district only gets back $1 a year for the use of the land, but you know, if it goes belly up, who ends up with it? But those clips were from our Planning Commission meeting on December 18th. Now we're going to fast forward to the January 3rd City Council meeting, which the 2 elected officials didn't bother to show up at. So if we could play that next clip, please.
Some good reasons for that, unfortunate reasons, but good reasons for that. We've got both of our new council members presently indisposed for, I'm going to call them personal, but very good reasons, and they cannot be with us tonight. That may facilitate some changes in our agenda moving forward. Tried to communicate those as much as possible, but obviously we're going to be skipping the oath of office for Mr. Kiefer and Mr. Rogg. They're obviously not here and will not be attending tonight. So just want to let everyone know that that's kind of what's going to be occurring there, and I'm going to move into the approval of the regular agenda. Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it with removal of the oath of office. to
Very
Joe.
good, thank you, Tom. Jenny, you agree with that?
Yes,
Very
absolutely.
good. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Here, there's how that goes.
And I was just going to say, Mr. Sederstrom, I mean, the way they operated business there with the three of them, that's not any different than how they really operated the business when you were on the council and they wouldn't let you speak, so they're pretty much doing business as usual.
Well, and there's no transparency. They ramrod this through. They don't supervise things. Now, we're going to go to the next one. They're going to be talking about the rink CUP, conditional use permit. So if we could play that, please.
School district, which is 832. The property is located at 8678 75th Street North, or CASA 12, as many know it as. The property is zoned and guided as A1. So point of clarification for folks in the audience, even with the existing school campus there, the property remains zoned and guided A1 and was not rezoned or re-guided as part of the construction of the school site. Portion of the property that would be affected by the proposal is approximately 4 acres, which would be disturbed. The overall site parcel that the ice arena would be located on is approximately 61 acres. The request this evening is to amend an existing conditional use permit. So for those of you that were with us in 2011, we actually had an amendment to a 2006 conditional use permit, which controlled or guided the athletic field construction and expansion. So there's a 2006 permit with various conditions. There was a 2011 permit that then superseded the 2006. And now this evening we are looking at that same permit again.
There, you know, I don't even know why they give these conditional use permits out, because they don't enforce anything. There were supposed to be wells on the test wells on the site for the Wildwood School. There's supposed to be biannual testing done. It's been tested once since 2012. In 7 years, it's been tested once. And Jenny Yingling from the Department of Health was relying on those test figures when she signed off and said, hey, go ahead and build this thing. We have our okay.
Right, because that was part of what the understanding was going to be, is that she gave her okay based upon the representations that there were going to be these testings periodically to ensure what the levels were. So that way, if they've got to take some other measures, they can take them. But the best that you've got is one test, which is the baseline, I would imagine. But from there, you have no idea how it's fluctuating with regard to the contaminants.
And she made the decision on the baseline test, and it hasn't been. The interesting thing is, the Bay West, who originally did this survey, suggested that on the environmental assessment worksheet, but there should be an environmental impact statement. Okay, so there should be further investigation. It was reported in the White Bear Press, but I noticed the planner didn't happen to mention that, and they blew it off. And the mayor said, well, we're the LGU. Well, they're not the LGU, we're the local governing unit. The Rice Creek watershed is the one that can determine that they get an impact statement, an environmental impact statement. And I was just at the Rice Creek watershed last Wednesday on the 9th, and we brought the subject up with a couple other things regarding the pollution that we're sitting with. So, okay, but if we could play the next clip with the CUP outline, that would be great.
They will lease the land from the school district. So in this case, there is no subdivision or physical transfer of land that is being proposed. So I believe that a draft of the lease was provided with your packets this evening as well for your review. The proposed project, again, serves approximately 4 acres. It's a little bit difficult to tell you exactly where those portions are, so you'll see on the plans that those are essentially where we believe the disturbance would occur, obviously the general location, but again, we're not creating new physical property boundaries for that 4-acre portion. The existing use of the site is actually the athletic fields and accessory uses, so the existing parking lot is already out there and would be is proposed to serve the new ice arena. We can take a look at that in just one moment. And this amendment is specific to the existing athletic field conditional use permit. and is considered an extension of the public school use. I would note that there are actually 3 conditional use permits that are already tied to this property. One of them being for the athletic fields, one of them being specific to Wildwood Elementary School, and one of them being specific to the high school and middle school. So there are 3 separate conditional use permits. Each of them do something slightly different, obviously, and each of them also address the sanitary sewer and the water hookups through the city of Muddy, which we will talk about in just one moment. The ice arena is proposed to be operational year-round at this time. They're not entirely sure whether the ice rink will be flooded for the full 12 months, but they're still figuring that out. The primary use of the facility is to support NHL-sized single sheet of ice. There are team rooms, bleachers, et cetera, and it would serve the high school boys and girls varsity hockey, and then also the city's leagues would be able to participate there as well. They are proposing that there would be some secondary uses that would have potential to use the facility as well. There are also some storage areas that are identified to support things like soccer and lacrosse, et cetera, out there. The parking that they are proposing to use is primarily the existing parking spaces that are directly southwest, essentially, of the proposed facility. That would support the facility with the exception of during events, which we can talk about in just a few moments. They are proposing that their hours of operation would be from 5 a.m. to midnight every day, and that there would be somewhere between 600 and 1,200 spectators that could be served on the facility. So there is basically 2 sides of bleachers. Each side is 600. And so depending on how fast and quickly they can construct them, once they may be at capacity at 600 for a while until they can fund the additional 600.
There we go. They kind of have that's the whole ball of wax what they're proposing. The traffic hasn't been addressed. They're talking about that. When they put the Wildwood School in, the Washington County did this traffic study, and I was the chair of the Planning Commission. I told them it wasn't going to work, and guess what? They had to come back and put a light in because it didn't work.
Right.
So,
and you can tell by the expected number of spectators really how large this facility is going to be. And a couple of comments that I had in listening to this too, they were talking about the issue of parking and whether or not they're going to have, using the parking lots that are already existing. Well, certainly one of the conditions that should be in that conditional use permit should be the requirement for having in writing the parameters of a joint parking agreement with that other property, because that other CUP, because I mentioned there's 3 CUPs there, that other CUP has as part of its requirements parking. And so now if you're using the parking that's under some other CUP, you really have to understand whether or not you're going to have conflicts in parking, and then people are going to start parking on the county road and walking to the arena. You're going to have, like you said, Mr. Sederstrom, there's going to be a lot of traffic issues if they do not plan properly for them.
The Wildwood School is already a nightmare with the traffic. It seems that nobody wants their kids to ride a bus anymore, so everybody's driving, so cars are lined up and traffic is a nightmare.
And I wonder if the neighbors, do they see any problem with the hours being from 5 in the morning to midnight? Do you know?
There was some concerned neighbors. This planning commission meeting went on for 2.5 hours, but there is no public comment on it at the city council. They say, they come up with, oh, well, the public comment was at the planning commission. You can't talk about it here. Again, so much for transparency. People are not allowed to speak directly to the council and give them their concerns.
So in other words, if a resident had a concern and they voiced it at the public hearing at the planning commission level, but let's say the councilman didn't listen to the planning commission meeting, or didn't attend it, or didn't
They
care.
don't, believe me, they have no clue.
Right, so they wouldn't actually have any concept of what the community's comments are. unless maybe they were transcribed in a report someplace, which they may not take to heart either, correct?
Yeah, correct. It's kind of like the blind leading the deaf, dumb, and stupid, you know? Okay, let's go to the next clip, and we'll go from there.
So 2 years after reviewing it and going through the environmental assessment worksheet, the City Council did approve a resolution certifying no need for additional environmental review. That was based on largely the MPCA's review and approval of what's called a response action plan and their construction plans for the project. So that brings us essentially to today.
And as you mentioned, Mr. Sederstrom, the planner, she just blew right on by that whole idea about the worksheet or having to have a
Environmental impact statement.
Yeah.
That they had set all these concerns about the work people when they were moving the dirt. They came out, they weren't supposed to break the top or bottom seal of the dump, and they broke both of them. They found out it isn't 10 or 15 feet deep. It goes down to 30 feet in places. And so they're ignoring that. Okay, let's go to the next clip. This is going to be a little bit longer, and we'll talk on the other side.
This gives a sense of the footprint of where the proposed ice arena would be located and how it would be accessed. You can see here the existing parking area located directly southwest of the facility. And then there's the main drive comes in here and pulls directly south of the facility and then heads east to get you to the Wildwood Elementary School. So hopefully folks can see that who are taking a look at the screen.
So you see the light green area
Yes.
in that picture? That is the total section of the municipal waste dump site that's up to 30 feet deep. And they're putting this thing smack in the middle of it. They're going to dig out. Well, there's still stuff all around it. And that's the area they surcharge, which they put 20 foot of dirt on to push all the stuff down, to put the weight and press it. Kind of like squeezing an orange. You squeeze it one side and she's going to come out in the other.
So if we put that slide up again, I don't know if that's possible or not, so our viewers can take a look at that, because I think that's an important point.
That light green area is the municipal waste site. You can see the parking lot and tennis courts in the left, and if you follow along the bottom, off to the east side there is where that Wildwood School is, which is probably approximately 140 feet away from a brownfield. And right now they're having I believe it's sulfur dioxide or sulfur, some chemical they're starting to get traces of it in the pipes in the school, because they have a layer of mat underneath the school and they have pipes to suck the air out, and they're starting to get this sulfur stuff in the school. And it's...
So is it a liquid or is it a vapor?
It's a vapor.
It's a vapor.
And so they couldn't build a house.
You can breathe in vapors.
Yep.
Wow.
You couldn't build a house on any place on this site, but they said, well, we'll go in with industrial standards, and they put the kids on it. And children, as you well know, do not have fully developed immune systems, so they're much more susceptible to these types of issues. Then we're going to go on to the next clip, and this is the mayor explaining some things. So if we'll talk on the other side.
Before this meeting kicked off. What was that about? What was being discussed over there? So in the interest of complete and total openness here, we are missing two of our members, obviously. We have 40% of our council is gone. It's unavoidable that these people are gone. I wish they were here tonight. They'd love to be sworn in tonight and take part in this process. They are not here, and that is unavoidable. So I did ask Alex whether or not these three members of the council who have not been exposed to the totality of this, we were not exposed to all this during the Planning Commission, that we could ask some questions tonight, get our questions answered, and then go ahead and table this to our February meeting so that our next two brand-new council members could take a look at it. Now, I don't expect that to be a long and involved process. Why do I say that? Why do I have that expectation? Because both of these gentlemen were on the Planning Commission, one being the chair, one being the vice chair. They do their homework. I'm sure you've dealt with them in the past. A lot of their questions have been answered. But on a project like this, I think that community buy-in is probably just as important as the questions we're asking you tonight. I think it is important.
He's explaining his little huddle in the corner. Now...
And who was he huddling with?
he was huddling with the people from the Rink 2. There's a Ken Haberman who we saw speaking before. He used to work for the MPCA, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. He started landmark development, and he is known in his advertisement that he will get things permitted that other companies can't do. Well, I have a friend of mine that just retired from the MPCA, and he is telling me a little of the stuff that goes on. And Haberman, because he worked there for a number of years before he went on his own, gets a free pass just about on anything. They give him much more leeway than anyone else doing something. So that's why when Bay West made the environmental assessment worksheet and recommended an environmental impact study, they then handed it over to Landmark and got them involved to get it pushed through. So you see there's a little...
So they didn't have to do the next step.
Right, and he's pushing it real hard. He's got his connections, he's got the skids greased, and that's why he's there. They got rid of Bay West, they ignored them, and they hired Haberman to come in with his Landmark Environmental and push it through. And we're going to have one more clip, and we'll talk on the other side of that one too, but that's exactly what happens. So let's go to the next clip.
If there was covenants on a property, we've gotten covenants before, the wedding barn, different things. We've X'd to get a copy of that. And that has been our attorney's request, that we at least see that so we know what's kind of going on, because it gives us a perspective of what's going on the site. It may provide new questions that we might want to clarify. All right, so to that end, we have a lease. I think the expectation is there's going to be a lease. So I don't know if this lease it's perpetual or it's a 99-year lease. I can't remember. What is the lease?
It's 20 years with the...
So this lease that they're talking about, what exactly is that?
The lease from Rink 2 Limited Liability Nonprofit Corporation is leasing the ground that the rink is going to be built on for 20 years. Then goodness knows what's going to happen. It'll be really interesting too, because there's that Cruz Guzman case that's before the courts right now. They're talking about changing the structure of the 3-4 county metropolitan area because of the white flight to the suburbs and unequal education. So this could really have an impact down the road. But once again, there's restrictive covenants on the deed that says nothing shall be built. And as I understand, the only way to change that is the original parties have to agree with it. Now, what is your perspective on that?
Well, certainly it isn't an easy thing to change a covenant that's on a deed. And oftentimes it's the type of thing that you would have to show some reason why that restrictive covenant should be removed, and that you might actually have to go to court in order to do so. And it might be possible that the parties can agree, except that I question that, because the grantor, the person whose property it was to start with, once they have given up all their right and interest to their land, they really, I don't know that they have any standing in order to be able to enter into any agreement with anybody, because they no longer have any interest in that property. It's that entity or that person who took on the property with that covenant that they are bound by that. And I think it's more of a judicial process where they have to demonstrate that that covenant is somehow a burden, or that it is no longer called for, or that there's some other reason that it shouldn't be on there. There was, years and years, many years ago, some communities back in the 40s had a covenant on their deeds that said that no persons of color could buy property in that neighborhood. Well, those particular covenants were found to be unconstitutional. And so that is an example of a covenant that was found to be not appropriate to be on the deeds.
If it's unconstitutional.
And it was taken off. But again, it was I think you have to show more than that somebody just doesn't want it there, because whoever took that property on, they took it with the covenant. And who was the grantor at the time, I don't see that they have any more interest in the land, that they have any standing to change that covenant.
Well, part of the thing was when the school bought the land, they was sold at a reduced rate because it was contaminated land. Now, the next question I have, if the legislature passed a law in 2007 and the covenant was put on in 2004, isn't that covenant basically grandfathered in? Any covenants from 2007 forward can be modified, but the ones that were existent before that shouldn't be able to be modified because it was before the fact. For example, if I was out here and I was speeding at 40 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, and then the next year they changed the speed limit to 40 miles an hour, I couldn't go back and get my money back.
No, that's right. Well, and I think you bring up a good point. Again, it depends on what that statute says. And usually statutes will address that issue of whether or not if it's retroactive, whether or not if it has an impact on past circumstances that are governed by that statute. So you really have to look at the statute and the wording of it to know whether or not there is an impact on something that was years earlier. My guess is that what happened years earlier stands as it is. But again, without having read the statute, you know, it's hard to say for sure.
Well, now the next thing they're going to be talking about is a performance bond. Now, they've been working on this for 4 years. They think they're going to spend between $11 and $14 million on this. So far, they've raised $37,000, and the fundraising basically stopped about a year ago when they found a bunch of parents quit giving because of the contaminated soil. So the next thing we're going to be talking about, this clip is about a performance bond, so we'll talk on the other side.
Performance bond, there's no levy. We're not tacked on to the levy that was just passed. There's no secret funds being funneled into our project.
I don't want conspiracy theories. I want to know if you have a performance bond of some type with the school district.
We do not. As part of the ground lease, you'll see we're required to, before we start construction, there's to be an escrow of $500,000.
Okay.
And so the purpose of that escrow is to, in case, just like the situation that Mr. Carr was alluding to, in case for whatever reason we start going through the project and it fails, we become bankrupt. That's money goes to the city, or excuse me, to the school district, and they're allowed to do with it whatever they want. They can tear down the building, they can repurpose it, they can use that money for whatever they want. And so that's the intention of that money. So there's no public monies will be used in the building of this building or the maintenance of this building or the operation.
In your lease, in order to be a successful lessee of the property, does that $500K, is that spelled out in the lease that is put into escrow before you break ground?
Yeah.
It is in the lease. Okay, because again, I'll be looking at the lease closely between.
Well, if it's a 12 or 11 to $14 million building, I don't think $500,000 is going to do much.
They'll pave the parking lot.
Well, yeah, that's about it. And, you know, one of the other clips I didn't have is they spent, what was it, $12.8 million, something like that, to put a series of containment, not ponds, but containers underneath the parking lot of the high school, because they knew there's stuff running off and it's coming through there, so they're trying to contain it. And then it's going to sit in there for a while and then it'll go out the overflow. So, I mean, they have spent a lot of money on parking lots. We could have, with the $18 million they spent on parking lots, we could have paved the whole city of Grant. But they just also, the school district a levy just passed, and it's a tiered levy that every year, if you have a $250,000 house, your taxes every 2 years for the next 6 years is going to go up $250 approximately, $259. Well, that's in the end is going to be what, a little over $750. Well, that's on a $250,000 home, and we've talked about this before. Well, in Grant, the only thing you can find for $250,000 is a vacant lot with a cardboard box on it. So the people that are in Grant, I don't think, I would be hard pressed to be able to pick out a house that does not have a market value of at least $400,000, and that's one of these little cracker boxes that was built in the 20s. Everything else is 500 and up.
Yeah.
The matter of fact, that the development that's going in across from Wildwood School in this hockey arena, they're putting in 16 lots, and they're starting at just slightly under $300,000. Now, there's 16 lots there.
And that's just for the lot?
That is for the lot.
Wow, and then you got to put a house on it in addition to that?
Yes, and then put in your own well and septic. I can imagine there's probably going to be people living in those big cardboard refrigerator boxes. No, I'm kidding. The other interesting thing further down the road, the year before, it's called White Oak Savannah or something on 12 and Lake Elmo Avenue. There's a 3-phase development in there, putting in 32 houses. They went the first phase of a dozen. Not one has been built yet. So there's not people exactly jumping off to snap up these $300,000 to $500,000 lots.
Right, right.
Now we're going to see Ken Haberman again from Landmark Development.
Back to the voluntary response action plan, there are no permits that are required by the PCA. What they will do at the end of the process is review a report called the Response Action Implementation Report. And they will issue a letter called a No Further Action Letter. It is a document that they do routinely, but it isn't a permit process.
But it's a sign-off of the project.
It's a sign-off from the project, and it essentially the response action plan describes what actions will be taken. The implementation report basically documents that that action plan was followed through the following means. The soils that were hauled off went to this particular place by this contractor on this date. Here are the receipts for the landfill, et cetera, so that it documents that everything has been implemented as approved by the PCA.
Will there be, Mr. Fredelin's here, is there going to be MPCA personnel on site at all? Will you be on site? How does this process get monitored as the excavation goes forward and the new fill is brought in? How is that monitoring taking place?
There will be environmental consultants on site. I'm assuming Landmark will be that team.
Okay.
The Pollution Control Agency can at any time do inspections and come visit sites. They tend not to do that simply from a resource standpoint, but they've been known to do that. There are, in our particular case, weekly updates that we provide to the PCA during the implementation of the response action plans. Those are electronically sent to them with figures and information about how things are going, what surprises, if any, have been found, et cetera. So.
Okay.
That's really interesting because, oh, there are people there all the time. They're not. Nobody was there. The Department of Labor sent 3 or 4 letters telling them that they could not put that sewer line through the contaminated soil. And in previous shows, I showed a picture of the dug up dirt, the mound of dirt, and you see all the crap and corruption in it. They didn't have it inspected, and they never signed off on it. So basically, they just walked away from it and ignored it. Now, all these tests, again, that we've talked about, they're supposed to be biannual tests. They've never been done. So basically, they're just getting a free pass. This guy's blowing smoke. They used to have a program back in the 80s where there were so many dump sites to be cleaned up. You would have the voluntary response action plan, okay? So in other words, they say, we realize you have a mess. You were a bad boy, and we're going to slap your hands and just do a little bit to take care of it. And so it's kind of like they pick you up for manslaughter, and then they say, well, you were a bad boy, but we're going to give you a parking ticket. And basically, it's a free pass. They had so many sites they couldn't clean up that they had to do something, and it's a voluntary response action plan, VRAP it's called.
A VRAP,
And that's where they took out most of the stuff from this brownfield. They sealed the dump with clay on the top of it, and that's where that restrictive covenant is. And so here they're ignoring it once again. The MPCA, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, is ignoring it. The health department's ignoring it. I brought this to a number of meetings when they were supposed to share in that 3M settlement for the water. And there's a 3M dump site right across from Wildwood School. And it went on deaf ears. They don't want to hear about it. You weren't named. Get out of here. I guess evidently they don't take children's health terribly well.
Now, one thing I found ironic in watching that last clip, Mr. Sederstrom, is that there was discussion about, and of course Mayor Huber seemed very interested in, the fact that the soil that is being pulled out of there, where is it going, and that the soil that is then the fill that's going to be replaced, where did it come from, and that there's going to be, the receipts for the documentation of this fill that's being put in, or documentation of where it came from. And it seemed kind of reminiscent of some of the city council meetings that we've shown in the past, where he wasn't interested in any of that at all when it came to dumping truckloads of sludge in the city of Grant, in a field, in a big pit. And so why is he so concerned and showing attentiveness when it comes to this particular site, but when it came to the other site with just dumping stuff that conceivably came from anywhere, contained any contaminants, he could care less?
Well, because he was an acquaintance or a friend of the guy that did the hydrovac dumping. The other interesting thing is, too, they're talking about hauling this soil out. Now, they're hauling the soil out from just underneath the building. They're not cleaning up the whole municipal waste site, that huge area that we're talking about. So, okay, let's say they're bringing in sand or whatever fill they bring in. When they connect the sewer up to that building, there will be sand underneath the sewer line. And of course, there's that void that they cleaned out. Well, all the other stuff from around will be able to seep right through the sewer line. And that's like putting a shovel full of sand in the middle of a mud puddle and saying it isn't going to get wet.
So they didn't learn anything from the first time around when they had that same similar issue with the school itself, when they disturbed the clay and they put the sand and gravel and the pipes to lay down on that sand and gravel, and had the same problem with all that contaminants running through to Lost Lake.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. Now we're going to talk about the traffic here, and we'll talk on the other side.
To this rink is going to be a real adventure without dedicated pathways, lighted pathways that are taken care of, especially in the winter. I'd hate to be your insurance carrier if that doesn't take place, because there's no way to walk up that road. We all know how narrow that is, especially if you have children there. You've got to have that. And that, as Jen said, I'd like to see that be some conditioned things in there. Reading your traffic impact study right now, I think, you alluded to it. Right now, under phase 2, you have a failure basically on the event management plan, right? They just can't quite move that amount of traffic out of there unless some changes are made. Is that a fair estimation of that?
Yeah, so we're open to those changes.
You're open to the changes. So we got to get those changes done, and of course, the staff would need to approve those changes moving forward.
So they're going to have 600 to 1,200 people coming in right now. Wildwood School created a nightmare. They had to change the entryway to the junior high school and put up traffic lights. Now they're going to add this conundrum on. They're going to have to, the Washington County is going to have to make that a 4-lane highway. There's just no two ways about it, because you're looking at all the kids they're bringing into Wildwood School. They also have a daycare there, or preschool. And there's cars lined up. For ball games, they're parking along the street because human nature is such that they're not going to go all the way down to Wildwood School and walk a quarter of a mile or better to get to the ice arena, especially when it's like 10 below. And this is just a total fiasco. They're not paying attention to the parking. They're not paying attention to the environmental concerns.
Well, it's clear that they acknowledge that their traffic impact statement shows that they can't accommodate the traffic that this is going to generate. And yet the mayor says, okay, so you're open to changes. Well, and they say, yes, we're open to changes, but just saying you're open to changes doesn't mean that you actually have a viable plan to address what the issue is.
Absolutely, and when you have a lot of spectators coming at this, people coming in and out, it's already a problem, and it's going to be exacerbated. There's a development going in across the street, which is going to be making it more complicated. There are going to be 16 homes at some point in time. We're in the second 10-year cycle of recessions. We had one in 2008. We're going to have one again, I think, next year. Everything's slowing down. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. The next clip is about Alex Rogashevsky. It's just a short clip, so when we play that, we'll talk on the other side.
So here, we're missing our two new council persons. So Alex has agreed to table this to our February meeting, where we'll have another quick discussion of it. We'll have everything wrapped up, hopefully in a bow, and we can get all of our late questions answered. So I would entertain a motion to table, gentlemen.
I would so move. I'll second.
Very good. All those in favor of tabling to February, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
So there we go, it's tabled.
Well, did we play 706? That's another interesting one. They did table it. I guess we lost that somewhere along the line. There's no 706. But that was just a 45-second minute clip anyway. If we can't find that, I guess we're going to go to the this next clip. This next clip is an exceedingly short clip. If control room can find 706, we'll come back to it. But 708.
707?
We just did 707. The table, the CUP.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. 708 is, now listen very carefully. The mayor under his breath swears. So if we could play that 708, we'll talk on the other side. Listen carefully.
He's learning to stretch. Yeah, no shit.
Time to stretch. No shit. That's our wonderful mayor. He's the most arrogant, condescending, disingenuous individual I've ever met in my life.
So how do you really feel about him, Mr. Sederstrom?
Yeah, just unbelievable. You know, this whole city is run laissez-faire. The planning is done, the planner and the engineer. People can say there's problems, this road needs to be fixed, that road needs to be fixed. And they blow it off. Basically, he doesn't do a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems to me that most of the issues are more focused on, you know, when an issue is brought up, that it's more about the politics of who brought up the issue rather than let's address it in a community-based way so that we can get this problem taken care of. Because when you're talking about roads, when you're talking about guardrails, when you're talking about, who your fire warden is going to be, these are community issues that should have nothing to do with personalities or politics. It should be all about what is best for the community. And there's a point where your elected officials really have to put the community before their own idea of what is best for them and what puts them in the best light with their cronies. And it is hard oftentimes for elected officials to do that because they want to get reelected and they know who has the most impact on their elections. So that's who they play to. They play to those special interests.
I agree. And that's why I didn't get reelected, is because they had hockey meetings and they were told to go out, go door to door, and solicit and phone call and solicit as many votes as they can for the hockey arena. The interesting thing is there's a real situation here. They're putting this private hockey arena, and that's commercial. And they're saying, oh, no, we can't have commercial. Well, the next clip is about Joyce Wielander's solar garden. It's 6 acres. She's taken 20 acres and going to have a pollinator garden. And then there's going to be 6 acres of those solar generators to generate electricity. But they're saying, oh, no, we can't do that, it's commercial. Well, what in the world is a hockey arena if that isn't commercial when it's owned by a private company?
Right.
And so we'll play the next clip and we'll talk on the other side.
Solar text amendment application, the applicant has requested the item to be tabled to the February council meeting. And I see no problem with doing that. I don't think that we have any objections to that. However, there is a lot going on with solar. And I think this process and the complexity of this deserves more discussion at the very least. I would propose that we do a special meeting sometime before January and have the ability to fully flesh this out.
February meeting.
Oh, pardon me, before February, right. Before the February meeting, pardon me.
You know what?
My bad.
I think that's a good idea, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
That's fine.
Tom, would you support that?
Well, yeah, because, I mean, the planning commission got a chance to discuss it,
Yeah.
I think, more than we
We could
even
use the
did.
same.
Much more, yeah. They had a couple of different bites at the apple, and again, while these guys were on the planning commission, again, we're sitting here with about 40%, and I want those guys ready to discuss this when we go to a second meeting, and then they can be sworn as well. Is that correct? They could be sworn at a special council meeting, correct?
Correct.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay, that's fantastic. What type of direction do you need on this, Kim? Just the council direction?
You
To
need
set
a-
it up? Do you need a vote?
No, we do not need a vote.
Okay. So,
We just have to find a time that will fit everybody, and you'll let us know, and we'll check our calendars.
We will.
That, again, they're running in the violation of open meeting law. That goes to court in March, by the way, because state statute says that you have to post the meeting. The clerk calls daisy chains people and then doesn't bother to post it, or hasn't. So we're going to see what happens with that. The violation of open meeting lawsuit was pretty much dismissed because it wasn't.
Yes, certain portions of it.
Certain portions of it, but the person that's on the hook is the clerk, because she hasn't posting it. And this next clip that we play, this last clip, is going to show you that. So if we can play the last clip.
to adjourn, we're going to be moving into a closed session.
Dave
We'll
got
take a
his hand up
5
over
minutes
there.
here. Dave?
Just so the record, whether we make a motion to recess either now or when we come back from our 5-minute break. We need that motion.
To recess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Executive session. Into executive session.
Into executive.
I'll second that.
Okay, real good.
After 5 minutes.
I'm going to call the vote to recess into executive session. All those in favor of recess, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Okay, let me just note for the record that that will be to enter executive session pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D, Subdivision 5, Subdivision 3 of 05. The purpose of that would be to discuss pending litigation in the matter of Larry Lanou and Loren Sederstrom versus the City of Grant et al.
Okay, very good. We are in recess.
So a couple of quick questions that I have with regard to what just happened there is that they said that they're going to be going into executive session. Was that executive session posted separately from the meeting?
No, it wasn't.
Okay, because it's my understanding that if you're going to have a closed session, because see, they went into recess so that they could go into a new meeting. And so when they go into that new meeting, that is a meeting in and of its own that has to be posted. Now, a different way that they could have approached this is that they could have had the item that they want to talk about on the agenda. And then they would say, we are going to close this part of the meeting for this discussion, and then we're going to then come back. So I'm unclear from the way, the terms that they used, what exactly they were doing, because by saying they're going into an executive session, it makes it sound like they're going into a new and different separate meeting, rather than just saying that they have an item on the agenda that they're going to close the current meeting for a particular period of time to discuss an item, and then they're going to come back out of that closed discussion back to their regular meeting. So I wasn't clear from how they were talking about it, which were they doing?
Well, they don't follow the rules anyway, but that's just the way it is. We'll keep you guys informed of what's happening next. Thanks for joining us. I think We've covered some ground, and I will let you know what happens next time in All Around Grant.